Because this goes on all over the world, right? All different governments have
Absolutely.
the same stuff going on, right?
I've had a chance to study cases, of course, in France, all over Europe, and in South America, and of course in the US.
What's the weirdest case you've ever studied?
I'm not sure weird is the right term for it. The most stimulating from a scientific point of view is a case in France in which a farmer was starting his tractor at 6 o'clock in the morning, and he saw something in his field some distance away, and he thought it was a helicopter or maybe a strange car that shouldn't have been there in his field. Mm-hmm. So he walked over, and all of a sudden he was paralyzed. He saw two small creatures. They were not quite the ones that you have here. They looked. They were very small, but they had normal heads, and they had normal human features, but he was paralyzed. And they started speaking to each other in some strange language, went back into the object took off. The interesting thing is that there were traces left. Those traces were studied by various agencies of the French government. There was no question he was not lying. The traces could not be duplicated. And he was paralyzed for 20 minutes after the object left, which is very interesting from the point of view of the effect of the kind of radiation that object may have been creating. And this is a very common report on the part of witnesses, this feeling of paralysis.
In this lavender field in France, a close encounter of the third kind. Farmer Maurice Mas was 30 yards away from a small egg-shaped object. Two small creatures about 3 feet tall were standing in front of a sliding door. When one of them pointed a metallic tube at the witness, he was paralyzed. The humanoids climbed back on board the craft, which promptly disappeared.
Socorro, New Mexico is the kind of small town people are usually traveling through on their way to someplace else. Visitors rarely slow down long enough to learn that this place has a mysterious past, and that one retired Socorro police officer is still haunted by the unearthly encounter that took place here 32 years ago. Lonnie Samara remembers April 24, 1964. He was a rookie on the force, returning to the station after an uneventful day. Then, a speeding vehicle passed Zamора's patrol car, and he set off in pursuit.
When we got to this hill, I saw a lot of dust, and I let the speeder go, and I turned to investigate. I could see a white object sitting between those two bushes over there, and I had to come real slow because this was a messed up road, had big rocks on it and everything. I thought it was the kids from my high school. They were racing up here, and maybe one of the teenagers had turned over.
When the speeding object came to a stop, Samara claims that he saw two figures in white coveralls emerge from a strange white UFO. He moved in slowly.
I came up here on this road till I could find a flat spot where I could park my car. I got out of the car and glanced down to the arroyo there, and I saw this white-looking object. It was sort of a big egg shape, bigger than a car. Those are the exact bushes that were there, and the craft was sitting right in between them two. So I started down to see what it was, and then I heard this big boom in the bottom, and the fire came off the bottom. So I started running behind my police car to take cover. I could feel the heat off that because it was windy like now. And then it gradually pulled up about 20, 30 feet and stayed there for a while and then just took off.
His radio was dead. Samara could only watch in awe as the object disappeared over the horizon. As soon as it was gone, the police radio crackled to life, and Samara called for backup. A New Mexico State Police unit quickly arrived.
We came down here, and we saw this big rock right down here, and it was still on fire. And then we saw the imprints of the legs of the craft, and then it was 4 of them. And then we saw this footprints are on here.
By nightfall, the FBI had arrived on scene and began gathering evidence.
They went down there and measured the footprints and everything. And we stayed out here till about 7 or 8 o'clock at night, still wondering what it was. But they didn't say what it was or not. About 9 o'clock, they said we went down to the courthouse, and we talked about it until about midnight.
Instantly, Socorro was the center of an unprecedented media frenzy.
This is one of the few sightings that got national attention immediately. Lonnie Zamora's story is on the national news. It's in all the newspapers. Everybody's talking about it.
Kevin Randall is an internationally renowned UFO investigator. He feels the Socorro events stand alone because of the amount of physical evidence collected at the scene.
Landing gear marks were found. The bush was burned by the UFO engine. There were occupants, creatures from the craft sighted by Lonnie Zamora.
And the event brought the greatest UFO researcher of the day to Socorro.
J. Allen Hynek, the Air Force consultant, came to Socorro. He looked at it, talked to Zamora, talked to Zamora's superiors, talked to people who saw the landing traces, took photographs. So there's physical evidence remaining behind. It's one of the few times they said there could be a flying saucer.
I had conversations with Dr. Hynek about the Socorro case, and his comments to me led me to believe that he felt that this was one of those cases where the government was unwilling to permit him to say what he would like to say about it, and that dismayed him a great deal.
According to Timmerman, a longtime associate of J. Allen Hynek, the Socorro event was one of the defining moments in Hynek's career.
He felt that this was one of the most important cases he'd come across. And I think that maybe his attitude toward it was developed as a result of his feel about the Lonnie Zamora, the primary witness.
Lonnie Zamora is very credible. He's a police officer. He has nothing to gain by telling this story. He is stuck with this story from the very beginning. This is what he saw. There's no question that Lonnie Zamora saw something unusual on the ground.
According to the Air Force and government, they say they don't know what it was, and they never told me the not to say or say about it, talk about it. But they say that they don't know what it was.
In fact, it took 21 years for the Air Force to finally offer an explanation for the Socorro UFO landing. They offered logs from the White Sands Missile Base, charting government testing of the newly developed lunar landing module. But the logs indicate that tests ended more than 5 hours before Zamora's sighting.
The Air Force explanation simply doesn't work because they have no documentation to place the lunar lander in that portion of New Mexico at that time. It does not match Zamora's description.
I think if Dr. Hynek were here today and saw this new documentation available to report that the Air Force says it was a lunar lander, if anything, that landed near Socorro, I think he'd say bourgeois. He'd say that this is the government trying to do its fancy little dance and saying things that will satisfy the media, that will satisfy the country and the world, that there's no reality to the UFO phenomena, whereas there is.
And according to JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, the lunar lander alluded to in the government data did not fly. It was dropped from a tower and had no system of independent propulsion as reported by Zamora. Randall believes that this is proof the Socorro UFO was not a lunar lander.
The Air Force completed their UFO investigation, said they had nothing more to say on it, and yet now they're coming out this year providing us with new explanations for old sightings. I have no idea why they're doing it, but I find it highly significant.
Randall believes it is Socorro's proximity to several highly sensitive military bases that have prompted a continuing disinformation campaign.
It is between the Los Alamos National Laboratory, the White Sands Missile Range. The Very Large Array radio telescope is 50 or 60 miles to the west. Socorro's right in the middle of this. If you've got a race of intelligent beings wanting to see what we're doing, this makes a perfect place for them to come to observe our steps into space and what our science is doing.
30 minutes after there.
According to Timmerman, the Socorro event convinced Dr. Hynek that the truth about UFOs was being manipulated by the Air Force. After Socorro, Hynek left his post. The government lost one of its most prestigious spokespersons and gained its most ardent critic.
Dr. Hynek saw this and it was very obvious to him that what Lonnie Zamora was saying in the depths of his honesty was not what the military was saying in their attempt to explain it.
Now, I'd like to get to that interview with a 28-year-old dairy farmer from upstate New York. He lives in a town called Newark, New York, and most important of all, he has been rated by his neighbors as quiet, serious, hardworking, and sober. His name is Gary Wilcox, and we caught up with Mr. Wilcox earlier today in his barn. He had an extension phone out there, and you'll notice the mooing in the background. And we talked with him, and we asked him where he was when he first sighted this UFO.
About 10 o'clock in the morning, I was spreading a load of manure on a hayfield up back the barn there, and I kept seeing this glittering thing. It was about pretty near a mile away, I guess, up on top of the hill. There's nothing in view. I mean, in the way, it's all open ground, and there's an old ice box up there where there's something reflected off from that. It looked just like a mirror shining in my face there, and I was going up the top of that hill to see if it was ready to plow anyway, and I drove on up with the tractor, and as I got up there about 100 feet of this glistening thing, I could see what it was.
What did it look like as you got closer to it?
Oh, I got 100, 200 yards from it there, and I couldn't see nothing. There wasn't no shining or nothing, but as I went closer, I got within 100 feet before I saw anything.
Mm-hmm.
Just as though when I took off, it was about 100 feet, and I couldn't see it. It was gone. I mean, but it looked like a wing tank to me at first. I've seen them when I was in the service quite a bit, fuel tanks off these planes.
Yeah, so was it then kind of cigar-shaped as these tip tanks are?
It was more egg-shaped than anything. It was about 20 foot long, 15 or 16 foot wide, and about 4 foot deep.
How close did you get to it?
A couple inches. I was touching it for about 2 hours.
What did the surface look like it was made out of?
Oh, aluminum colored, whitish colored. It had a whitish cast to it, but it wasn't bright. It was shiny, but it wasn't real bright. It was just like a dish of some kind of cooking dish, really, about what it was.
Now, did a door open before these people came out of it? How did they appear? How did you meet the little men?
Well, I don't know. I was feeling everything there, just getting ready to come back down and call the sheriff up and see if something had fallen off an airplane, but I was kind of wondering, too, because it was off the ground. It was about 4 foot off the ground and had this idling noise. And, I don't know, nothing happened. I was touching it there for a couple of minutes, and I was just getting ready to go, and from underneath it someplace, I don't know, these two things or men or whatever they are came. They're about 4 foot high. I don't know what they are or who they were, but they talked to me for about 2 hours up there.
You could perfectly understand them,
Yeah,
then?
they talk better English than you're talking.
Uh-huh. Did they talk with any kind of an accent?
No accent or nothing. I spoke German and Russian when I was in the service, and nothing like either one of them.
Mm-hmm. And what did they have to tell you? What were some of the things they said? How did they address you?
Oh, first thing they said was, don't be alarmed. We have talked to people before. And they were questioning how I had seen them and stuff. They were quite concerned, said I shouldn't have seen them within 100 feet or so. And then when I told them I saw them way down where I was spreading manure, I was pretty near a mile away. They were quite concerned. They said I shouldn't have seen them in the daytime like that. That's why they land in the daytime.
Did they tell you what they were doing there?
Well, they said that they were traveling this hemisphere, this trip. Each one had a tray in their hands. And had it full of grass and stuff. It was side looked like they took the knife and cut it right out of the ground, just a slab of it in each tray. And that's what they were doing. They said collecting organic material and stuff.
Where did they say they were from?
Well, I mean, this sounds awful silly, I know, but they told me they were from what I know as a planet Mars. Every time they spoke of stuff, they referred to it as I know, or as we know here, like as we know Earth, as we know Mars, and stuff like that.
You sound like you find it rather hard to believe yourself.
Well, all I know is I was up there for 2 hours. I was touching the thing and talking to somebody. I don't know who it was.
And you say you talked to them for about 2 hours?
Oh, it was probably an hour and a half. I was up there about 2 hours altogether.
Did they mention anything about man's getting into space, sort of coming into their territory?
Well, they talk about a lot of stuff. Some of the stuff I can't say anything about. Some of it I can, but they was talking about that people were silly to go into space, that they would never survive there. Just as they can't survive here, they said they can only make a trip about every 2 years, the two that were here. That they can't stay in this atmosphere, that Earthmen would have even a harder time than they do, because they were telling me they're much farther advanced in this kind of stuff than we are. But they were more interested in agriculture, aspects of agriculture than anything. They asked me what I was doing about the manure and what I was where it got it and what it did and all that stuff. They didn't know nothing about agriculture. They don't have no organic material or anything like that up there. They said they survive in what they get out of the atmosphere they have.
And
They didn't stress any point. They made a lot of statements like that, but they never stressed the point. They didn't say how they lived or anything like that.
Did you say that there were other things they told you that you cannot reveal?
Yeah, I mean...
Why not? Why can't you reveal these other things?
Oh, I guess I better not say anything about it.
Why?
Well, this is being investigated into yet.
Who's investigating it?
Well, it's supposed to be the Air Force supposed to be coming around, I guess, from what the sheriff says.
You can't tell us what they told you?
No, I shouldn't, I mean, for my own personal reasons.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us an indication of what it was?
No.
What did it concern?
Well, it concerned them being here more than anything.
Why they were here? Did these creatures have features like we do on Earth? They have eyes?
Well, they were about 4 foot tall, and they had arms and legs and heads, but where they had features, I would presume so. They just had a complete uniform, covered everything. I mean, as far as seeing features, you couldn't see anything. The voice come from it, from the front one someplace. I don't know. Couldn't say it come from the head, or couldn't say it come from the stomach, or where. It just could hear the voice come from it someplace. He was about 4 or 5 feet away from me.
What color were the uniforms?
Same color as the ship.
Sort of like a spacesuit.
Well, it was the same color. I didn't touch the uniforms, but they looked to me like the same kind of stuff. They seemed to go back underneath the ship. The back one went first, and this front one turned around. They both went back underneath the ship, and where they went to, I don't know. It was only about 60 seconds, and the thing took off. And I was standing about 6 inches from it when it took off.
And there you have, reporting from his barn in Newark, New York, Gary Wilcox, a 28-year-old dairy farmer who says he saw... Well, you heard Mr. Wilcox.
I heard my dog barking, and it didn't sound normal to me. At first, I just ignored him, but then I decided to go see what he was barking about. I came over here, and I saw 2 men, or rather 2 beings.
How far away were they?
They were on the other side of that road there, about 12, 15 feet away.
Can you tell us what they looked like?
They were pretty small. I'd say about 3 feet tall.
So your flying saucer was over there. How did it leave?
Well, it went straight up about 150 feet.
Straight up, like that?
Well, that's when it changed into a ball of fire and headed east.
That day, it was about 5 o'clock in the evening. I was working in the fields when I saw a strange object. I tried to get closer. I was about 30 meters from it when I saw it. Only when it took off, 30 or 40 seconds later, could I really notice its shape and form.
It is probably the first time that after a very well characterized event concerning a UFO, there was a full scientific study showing that some changes were brought to the plants near the place where the UFO landed, and that these biochemical changes were decreasing with increasing distances from the trace, so that all the findings, the biochemical findings, could be put into equations and be mathematically characterized in a very accurate way. Then these findings were compared with the same result obtained several years later, so that these controls led us to realize that on the same area, 2 years after the event, all the findings, all the things were recovering a normal shape, a normal pattern of biochemical characteristics. So it's now possible to say that in time and in distance, all the biochemical findings are consistent with the description given by the witness. And it is probably the first time in the world, to my knowledge, that such a complete set of data has been obtained on such cases of UFO landing.
En effet, in effect, we were in the presence of an unidentified phenomenon, which had been witnessed and that had left traces in the soil and surrounding environment.
A man in Missouri gave a paper on 546 landing cases from 34 countries. These all involve traces, that is, where some marks were left after the UFO took off. One place where this happened was on the Johnson farm in Delphos, Kansas, November 2nd, 1971. The strange marks in the middle there are a ring of soil affected by a UFO. There are a whole host of tests run on the ring. It's clear that something strange happened to the soil as far down as 14 inches deep. To give you an example of what happens to soil, the soil on the left was from that ring, obviously different in color and texture, and I might say from laboratory tests also different in composition from the normal soil on the right.
Never mind the saucer. Did you see the guys who were driving? Does a nuclear physicist believe in little green men? Well, they're usually little. They're practically never green, whether they're men or women or both or neither, I don't know. The evidence is overwhelming that responsible, respectable earthlings, people whose testimony you'd like on your side in a court of law, have indeed on many an occasion observed not only saucers on or near the ground, but saucers accompanied by critters, humanoids, creatures, little guys, whatever you want to call them. I don't mean once or twice. The Humanoid Study Group with a Mutual UFO Network, one of the world's largest groups, 5,000 plus members, I'm on the board, has collected more than 3,500 humanoid sightings. A man named Ted Phillips in Missouri has collected more than 5,000 physical trace cases from 65 countries. These are cases where the saucer is seen on or near the ground, and after it leaves, one finds physical changes, the equivalent of burn circles, burn rings, landing gear marks. 23%, more than 1,000 of these cases involve reports of beings associated with the craft. And the world's outstanding abduction researchers, Dr. Mack and several others, can certainly list over 1,000 cases for you of abductions involving observations of typically little guys. We'll work our way up. A little hard to get adjusted. We'll start with just a normal run-of-the-mill physical trace case. This one from Delphos, Kansas. The trace is that ring there. Ronnie Johnson, age 16, finishing his chores for the evening, was 75 feet away to the left, getting ready to go in for dinner, looks up, there's a big mushroom-shaped object sitting a foot or two off the ground, about 10 feet in diameter, brilliantly glowing. So bright that he's temporarily blinded. And he's paralyzed. He literally can't move. So is his dog, so it's not psychological. He's standing there gawking at this thing when suddenly it takes off slowly, just clearing the shed that you see the shadow of here, dashes the 250 feet into the house, shouts at his parents to come and see the flying saucer that he had just seen. They laugh at him. He gets mad. You don't need to believe me. You go out and see it for yourself. They do go out and they do see it. Then he tries to convince them, and eventually successfully, to come back and look where it had landed on their farm near Delphos, Kansas. They're, to say the least, dubious. They come back here, though, and this ring of soil, oh well, must be Murphy's Law here. Huh? Is there another laser pointer in the house? Anyway, you can see the dry ring of soil in the middle of this thing. And his mother reaches down. The soil ring was glowing, which is a little weird, and the bottom of the tree was glowing. His mother reaches down, touches the glowing ring of soil, lifts her hand up, her fingers go numb. She can't take pulses at the rest home where she works part-time as a nurse. They get a little frightened by that, and they call the sheriff's office. They come out and check for radioactivity. For some reason, that's what everybody worries about. Believe me, there are lots worse things in the world than radioactivity. I'll duck when the tomatoes come for that one. But he doesn't find any radioactivity, the sheriff. An article appears in a local paper And about a month later, somebody sends Ted Phillips in the neighboring state of Missouri, this is Kansas, a copy of the article. Ted calls the sheriff, checks out the Johnsons, fine people, known them for years. He goes out there, didn't expect to find much. It had rained, snowed, snow had melted. Gets out there, everything is mud except for the dry ring of soil. Mud inside, mud outside, but the ring is dry. Pours water on it, runs right off. 14 inches down in the ring, the soil is dry compared to the soil nearby. He runs tests on the soil. You can see the results of those. This is a seed germination test. On the left, the ring soil won't grow anything. On the right, normal soil from a few feet away grows stuff fine. He ran moisture absorption tests. That's water sitting on the ring soil. Water, not plastic, not glue, water. It won't absorb moisture. Ted sent me samples of the soil. I had good lab tests run. Ring soil on the left, normal soil on the right, obviously different in color and texture. The good lab tests show the ring soil at a higher level of soluble minerals than the normal soil. It was too salty to grow anything if you want to look at it in those terms. Does this mean the aliens dumped their garbage there? Of course not. Probably means that normal soil like that on the right was intensely irradiated with something like microwaves, like cooking a turkey in a microwave oven. Drive off the moisture, convert insolubles to solubles. New direction for ufological research. Lab testing, something you can get your mitts on. This is one, as I said, of 5,000 physical trace cases. And like 77% of those cases, it did not involve reports of creatures, critters, etc.
4 of the local lads had seen the object come over and they went to investigate. Now, Malcolm, Mrs. Bowen, your mother, has described what they saw from the window of the house and from the street. What did you lads do after you'd seen it coming over?
Well, the rest of them run up and I just stayed there.
What did you see when it was coming over in the sky? What did it look like?
It was just like an ordinary saucer with a round sort of thing on the top. We just come across the fields and, saw it in the sky. We thought it was an aeroplane at first till we all kept quiet, and we saw it going round, and then we said it couldn't be an aeroplane, and we didn't hear any sound.
So it come over here, over the fields here, and it landed in this field here. It was red, and then we ran up and see what it was. And when we ran up, we couldn't see it, so we ran back down to where Malk was, and they walked across the fields with the police.
Well, it seemed like a saucer, and then it changed in different colours. It changed like in a red, and then it come into like a greenish colour, and then a blue.
It was then as the object started to glow, bright red, as if somebody had lit a bonfire in the middle of the field, and it spanned off the field. We could see the outline of it clearly, couldn't we?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Like a dome. But we couldn't see no doors, no nothing. But there was no heat. It was just a red glow, like a sunset.
And then when I did get frightened of it,
yes,
when it dropped, and I shouted Malcolm for all I was worth, and of course
nobody replied.
Nobody replied back to us.
We couldn't even hear a bird, everything was dead. And then there was a man standing behind us. And we turned round and he says, "Did you two see it?" We said, "Yes, we did see it, didn't we?"
Yes, definitely.
And he said, "Well, I was in the bedroom." And we thought the fields were on fire because the bedroom was illuminated red. He says, "So I came down." He says, "I thought I was seeing things."
I thought, well, what the hell did I do to deserve this? All these guys coming in telling me that if I don't keep my mouth shut, they're going to throw me in jail.
Harold Butcher had never been treated so harshly. But then again, he'd never seen anything so completely astonishing.
I've never seen anything move as fast as this thing moved and disappear and come back as quick as it did. It moved so fast that you couldn't hardly see it. It was there 1 minute and gone the next.
Seen once, remembered for a lifetime. Outside this barn in Cherry Creek, New York, 1965. Harold was 16.
As he was working in the barn, he noticed that the radio he was listening to became staticky and blanked out. He had been listening to music, and there was a glow in the sky, and he ran to the window to see what was happening. and saw this gigantic object descending.
What it was, or where it came from, is still unexplained, but not for lack of trying. 2 investigative units combed this area. One was the Air Force's Project Blue Book, the other a civilian watchdog group.
And NICAP sent one of our investigation teams to the scene. There was one in western New York State, and they were there within 1 day of the sighting.
At the time, Richard Hall was Assistant Director of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. NICAP's distinguished membership included scientists, philosophers, retired military personnel, people interested in solving the UFO mystery.
NICAP came into existence because the Air Force was being very secretive about UFOs, and it was felt that a high-level civilian group could maybe pry loose some information. We were basically adversarial. The Air Force, we felt, was hiding information, and we were trying to get information out.
When Project Blue Book went into the field, NICAP was right on their heels, doggedly gathering information and eyewitnesses that the Air Force had overlooked.
Project Blue Book was the Air Force office that investigated UFO sightings for the United States government. The Air Force system in Blue Book was to label reports in one of 3 ways. Either it was explained, in which case they would say what they thought it was, an aircraft or a balloon or whatever, or it was unexplained, unknown, they used to say, and the third was insufficient data.
The incident at Cherry Creek was labeled as a true unknown.
It was a very interesting case, and one with multiple evidence, including the electromagnetic effects, the physical traces, the illumination, everything. It was a classic mainline UFO sighting.
Well, it looked like an airplane. It was that big. And when it sat in the field, it had 3 legs on it. It looked like 2 turkey platters put together with a roll of rivets around the outside. And it sat there a good 5 minutes, so I got one real good look at it. And I've never seen my animals act the way that these did, because they jumped and kicked and bucked and made all kinds of ungodly noises.
He claimed to have seen this object descending and then ascending, and he reported various details, including a red vapor emanating from the lower edge of the object. Claimed he saw the object take off, accelerate rapidly, disappear into clouds, coloring the clouds green. That's the sighting as a condensed version of it that's contained in the NICAP file.
Bob Galgansky has carefully researched the incident at Cherry Creek and has spent many hours trying to track down additional eyewitnesses, like the 2 state troopers who filed an official police report, then just seemed to disappear off the face of the earth.
They had a lot to lose by reporting this. They were risking their reputation. And for them to come out and actually state that they had seen something like that meant a great deal to me. It indicated to me that something genuine was happening in the area.
Dick Nelson still lives next to the Butcher farm and remembers talking to the troopers the night of the UFO incident.
Well, after the policemen saw it, they had a whole different attitude towards it. They couldn't believe what they saw.
Then the big guns descended. The Air Force arrived to investigate, and on their heels was NICAP.
Next thing I know, here come this guy from the Air Force. They had a truckload of guys that taped off the whole area out there and put a guard on each corner of the property there.
That's when, Butcher says, he was threatened by the Air Force officer in charge for taking pictures of the military investigation.
I had some pictures of it that I took, and the Air Force took them, and they wouldn't even let me have them. They told me if I had any more pictures and if they come out, I would end up in jail or the nut house, one of the 2.
They were scared. I mean, everybody was scared.
I believe there was a UFO sighting at Cherry Creek at the Carr farm. I don't think it was. It had the degree of strangeness that the NICAP report would seem to indicate it had.
Galgansky's conclusions please no one. Yes, Air Force work was shoddy, but Butcher's testimony is too inconsistent for anyone, military or civilian, to explain.
what you find is a gradual escalation of detail. You find that Harold begins to tell the second team of investigators different things that he didn't tell the first, and there's this gradual polishing of the account.
Richard Hall does not agree.
There's some minor discrepancies in the report, but that almost makes it more believable too, because if you get absolute perfect uniform testimony, then you got to be suspicious that something was rehearsed.
Ironically, the most compelling support for Harold Butcher's UFO encounter comes from the Air Force itself, which concluded that this one was a true unknown.
That, to me, is the most perplexing aspect of this entire case. And why the Air Force, which had never, ever been UFO friendly, would classify this as unidentified is beyond me.
The fact that the Air Force classified this as an unidentified is very interesting and very significant because they were very stingy about doing that. Ordinarily, they would be very happy if they could label a sighting and get rid of it. If it was even if it was stretching the truth, they would try to explain it as an aircraft or a balloon or strobe lights or something, a meteor.
Maybe they let this one slip by, or maybe indeed there's something more to it than we know.
I think perhaps the fact that NICAP was on the scene at the same time they were might have inhibited them a little bit in this case because they knew we had the goods on it.
Ted Phillips is a veteran UFO investigator who specializes in sightings where some physical trace of the incident is left. Close encounters of the second kind.
I think the physical trace landing cases give us the most direct approach to resolving the UFO problem, without question. Because we've compiled aerial observation, visual observations for 30 years. And they don't tell us that much. I mean, they tell us what the UFO looks like, how it acts at various speeds, colors, and so on. But what we need is something we can take into a laboratory.
One of Phillips' most interesting cases occurred on June 28, 1973, outside Columbia, Missouri. Just after midnight, James Richards, an employee of the University of Missouri, and his 16-year-old daughter, Ann, were preparing for bed in their trailer home on an isolated country road. Richards' 3-year-old son, Jamie, woke up and began to cry. The events that followed so frightened the Richards that Ann still refuses to discuss them. But James Richards remembers.
My daughter was going to the icebox refrigerator to get some milk for the baby. And she notices 2 bright lights, like spotlights. And then they converge into one big brown ball, illuminate the whole area. With the trees swaying and would almost blind me. Because I couldn't look directly because it's too bright, like an eclipse. That's what I took it to see. So I looked at it on an angle, you might say, you see. And then, too, the trees were swaying. And then we heard outside this thrashing going around the tree. And so I got kind of shook, naturally. So I went and got my guns. I loaded them, and my daughter went and ran, locked the door. Something did snap in my mind, though, not to shoot. Because it's a rule, anytime I heard anything outside at night, the first thing I would do is get my flashlight and a gun. I don't care what it is. I'll go outside and start searching. But something clicked in my mind and said, don't go outside. Don't go outside. And I slept the guns there on top of the deep freeze. And just looked out the window and just observed the best I could. You have to see it yourself to really have an idea what I'm talking about. Because nothing I know of turns its colors, all different colors, beautiful colors, and do a 90-degree angle without making a sound, and hover there in space. And you sit there and look and all, you know. Oh, I said, man, it's pretty. But yet still, you was frightened because you were dealing with something that you never seen before. You had no idea. You see, you didn't know what it was going to do any harm or what.
Members of the Richards family weren't the only ones affected by the presence of the strange craft.
I have a doghouse out there on that side. And them dogs scurry up under the building and stayed till the whole event was over. They didn't bark at all. No siree.
With a feeling of relief, Richards watched as the light dimmed somewhat and began to ease away. But suddenly, it made a sharp turn and approached the trailer again.
When it came back up the second time, I felt like death was at hand. I figured this was it. As soon as it touched down, then the whole area just lit up. See, you was actually blind, you see, but you could hear the thrash and walk around this particular tree. Just this one tree now. Then my daughter said, look at the tree, just pulling on the tree, and then next thing you heard the tree snap, that limb snap. I tried to call for help. This time my lights went completely out and came back on. She couldn't call out. Telephone line was dead. You didn't hear a buzz tone or anything. Couldn't nobody call in, I couldn't call out, just complete like your wires were cut until they left.
In the course of his investigation of the Richards case, Ted Phillips spoke with the telephone operator who had traced the aborted emergency call.
I talked to the operator, contacted by the directory assistance operator, and she had been trying for 3 minutes to call Richards, but the line was indeed dead. Finally, suddenly, after she had tried 5 times, she broke through, and he was on the line. Well, when the police arrived, it was a young officer by himself. Richards told him what had happened, and he said the officer didn't seem to be too excited about going out into this darkened area. So they took a flashlight, they went over the fence, and sure enough, they found some imprints, which are about 5 inches long, about 3 inches wide, and about 2 to 2.5 inches into the ground. Now, I have to point out that the next day, a newspaper reporter was out there. He picked it up from the police blotter. And this reporter weighs about 350 pounds, and he could barely make a heel mark in the ground. It was that dry, that hard. So we're talking about considerable weight. At the site, then, I found this pattern of imprints down through there. The tree limb, which was twisted and pulled down, stripped down at a point 12.5 feet above the ground. And several other broken limbs. We arrived there a week after the event, and leaves were absolutely burnt, very badly burnt, down in the lower regions where the UFO had been. And leaves on the limbs some 40, 45 feet up in the air above this area were starting to die.
That big tree is completely dead today. The Richards have since moved to a new home surrounded by plenty of neighbors. But their hope of finding an answer for what they saw that night in June remains empty.
We interviewed or investigated 2 separate landing reports over there. One was the December 21st case reported by Horace Burns of Grottos, who said he saw a UFO cross the road ahead of his car stalled, and the object landed in the field. We visited with Professor Ernest Gaiman of the Eastern Mennonite College, and he has done a very thorough investigation job for us. He is an ICAP member. The other incident was more recent. I believe the date was January 19, also near Waynesboro. This involved a man who said that he had witnessed a UFO landing and saw some small beings emerge from the object. There was no kind of communication. He just was confronted by these beings, and he stated that he was very frightened by the experience. Now, I hasten to add that we don't necessarily believe this story 100%. We're interested in objective scientific investigation, and that's why we were there. But one point I would like to make is that this man very obviously had been intimidated by some kind of government agents, unidentified. We don't know who they were, Air Force, FBI, CIA. But it was very obvious from talking to this man's friends, who are very responsible local citizens, that this man had been intimidated and could not talk about his experience.
Mr. Hall, in your investigation of these 2 sightings, were there any material evidence of a craft of some kind landing?
No, in the first case, December 21st, there was physical evidence. Professor Gaiman investigated the site and tested it with a Geiger counter and found extremely high radioactivity at where the object had been seen to land. This was later denied by the Air Force, or they implied that Professor Gaiman was a professor of German and didn't know what he was doing. But the Air Force failed to mention that a couple of DuPont engineers were also present and verified the high radioactivity. And this is a good form of physical evidence, as was the fact that the man's car motor failed as the UFO passed by. In the second case, there was no physical evidence, but there had been several rain and snowstorms in between the sighting and the investigation, so this is not too surprising.
As you heard Mr. Hall said in the case up at Grottoes, the man said that when the alleged UFO hovered over his car or passed over it, his engine stalled out. This also happened in the case of a sighting in Williamsburg, which you are probably familiar with, where two men were driving down the highway, and in separate cars, both men said their cars stalled out as they came within sight of a large cone-shaped object hovering over a field. These sightings and sightings in years gone by have also shown cases where electronic effects have come about when the UFO had been sighted. I asked Mr. Hall if there was any explanation for this.
Yes, we have a section in the UFO evidence report which lists past cases of so-called electromagnetic interference. There is no known explanation for this. There are a few guesses that it apparently is some powerful electrostatic field causing it, but the exact mechanism of how it works, nobody knows.
Another case on record concerning these electromagnetic interferences happened several years ago when a group of jet planes were heading out to sea down somewhere in the southern part of the country near Florida, and something happened and they never returned again. So they sent another Coast Guard plane out to try to find them, see if perhaps they had crashed or something, and this plane too would never return. Although they could never be sure, they believed that some kind of electronic interference had caused their radar and their compass to go completely out of whack, and thus they lost their course and simply ran out of fuel in the middle of the Atlantic. This is, too, a very interesting case. It has been the policy of the press, both presses, to report on UFO sightings only within the state that the sighting occurs. I hasten to add here that both presses here in Virginia, I think, gave very excellent coverage to sightings here in the Virginia area. And for this reason, Richmonders did not know whether Virginia was the only place where flying saucers were being seen during December and January. We, of course, knew they were being seen here. And until this report, I feel, most Richmonders didn't have any idea that there were sightings elsewhere during the same period. We asked Mr. Hall about this.
Yes, as a matter of fact, when the sightings were occurring in Virginia, they were actually occurring all up and down the East Coast. And apparently, these stories very seldom go out on news wires outside of a given state. So the overall picture is not realized by anyone in one state. We did get sightings at the same time from New Hampshire. Incidentally, there was a case of a car being stalled as the UFO passed over in New Hampshire. There were sightings in Massachusetts, Connecticut, North Carolina, and Georgia. When the sightings stopped in the Virginia area, they also stopped up and down the coast, and now they have shifted out to the West Coast, and we're starting to get very similar reports from Washington State, Idaho, Oregon, and all that region. There was one case where a border patrolman reported seeing a large disc-shaped object which descended and hovered above his car, ahead of his car, and then after hovering for a few seconds, zoomed back up through the overcast and disappeared. On the same night, there was a reported landing, which the object left markings on the ground. It's the same sort of thing. It's been very consistent over the years, but it appears to be an unusual number of reported landings in the past year or so.
On the evening of October 25, 1973, a young Pennsylvania farmer, Stephen Pulaski, and at least 15 other witnesses saw a bright object hovering over a field near them. Stephen grabbed his rifle and went to investigate. It was then that he noticed something walking along by the fence. They were hairy and long-armed, with greenish-yellow eyes, and a smell like burning rubber was present. Stephen sensed that these creatures were not friendly, and fired a tracer bullet over their heads. And when they kept on coming, he fired directly at one of them. The creatures then all disappeared into the woods, and the glowing object disappeared from the field instantaneously. UFO researchers as well as a state trooper were called in to investigate. When they arrived, the people there told them that Stephen had been growling like an animal and flailing his arms. His own dog ran toward him, and Stephen attacked the dog. Stephen then collapsed, and after a time began to come to his senses. The entire group commented on the nauseating, sulfur-like odor that was present.
We was in a pickup truck. We was coming out to my father's farm in Vances, Mellen. And we turned off the main road up a dirt lane that goes up to his farm. As we were going up the lane, I looked to the left and I seen this big orange ball in the sky, and it wasn't no more than maybe 100 feet off the ground. And my wife looked, we were just astonished. We stopped, and then we drove on up to the house. I went in the house. So we all looked off the porch and watched it. It was just coming down slow. It was making like some kind of humming noise then. My mother and him was there, and they was a little scared. I said, I'll get on Vances, and I said, I'll look and see what I can see from down there. So we went down, pulled up in her driveway. I'm looking up on a hill, and all I can see is like a reflection off the ground. I'm going to have to go back to my house, I said, and I'll go out and field and check. So they had twin boys there, and their name was Rick and Nick. It was about from 10 to 12 years old now. They said, can we go up with you for the ride? I said, yeah, get in. So they got in the back of my truck, and we went to my dad's house, and we parked the truck in front of the house. Got out of the truck, and you could hear this like a lawnmower, but it was a real loud whirring noise, like a turbine running or something. And we're standing there listening, and I hear like this distant crying, like a baby crying, a kid yelling, whatever. And it scared me. So my dad had a couple tracers there for his 30-06 rifle. Some bullets. Don't ask me why I did it, because I put the tracers in and I carried the bullets with me after. And these two twins were standing there with me, and one twin said, there comes something along the fence. And it must have been maybe 100 feet to my right, the hillside. And I'm looking, and I could see the movement of the thing from the glow of this ball. So when it got within about maybe 50 or 60 feet, maybe 70 feet away from it, I looked at it, and there was this object walking. It was real tall, and it seemed like it was walking real slow, but taking long strides. I mean, there was a movement like slow in the body, but strides of it. And I'm watching it, and here it's following the fence line. And every time it would get to another fence post, it would make this noise. And then I seen why it was making this noise for this thing behind it, another one to come right up behind it. So as the second one would get up to it, it would proceed up to another fence post. And this thing when it got directly diagonal from us, his one little twin, he started screaming. I think it was Ricky. He started running. He ran back down to the house. Nicky grabbed my leg. He said, shoot it, shoot it. So I'm standing there, so I shot a tracer over its head, and the tracer flared. And I seen these things, they was tall. The fence posts that were there were railroad ties. They towered over top of these things. The front one towered over 2 feet. And the second one must have been maybe a foot shorter. Shot the tracer over there, and I just looked at it, and the front one looked at me, and I could just see the glow of its eyes. So I shot the second tracer. Same thing. And I mean, when I shot the second tracer, first one reached its hand back, and to my mind, it would be the length of this table, and it touched the other one, and that light went out. The light just completely went out. And they're standing there, and I could see both her eyes looking at me, just like cat eyes, and this little kid screamed. So I put a regular bullet in. Here there was still a glow out there from the ground, like the ground was low, the glow was along the fence, but the big ball that went out. And I shot the first shot, and I remember seeing a piece of that wood just splatter, just come out to the side of it. I put the other 2 bullets I had underneath the chamber, and I made 3. I shot again, and twice I hit right in it because it sounded just like shooting into a lake or something, just like water popping. And I hit the thing. They turned around, and they followed that fence. They didn't go towards it, like they followed that fence back. They started moving. We run. We both run.
On a November day in 1973, dogs started barking. TV sets went blank. Years later, Judy Fergus described what 2 neighborhood boys saw in a vacant lot behind the Von Willers' house.
Walked up through the path with the grass, everything. It's like if I was walking up and all of a sudden, here you are.
It was 10 feet high and 12 feet wide. They were asked to separately draw pictures. One of the boys had a flashlight. He said he tapped on the thing, it came to life, rose up, and took off to the southwest.
That's right. It just disappeared as just like a bat out of hell. It got going. It left fast.
Mel Podell heads a UFO investigation group that back then went to the site. They found indentations where it looked like metal legs might have been.
And there was a swirl on the grass where the UFO object had been.
I remember the grass being in such a perfect sweep, as if whatever landed, and it was round, would have and gone up. you know.
The two boys left, no forwarding address, leaving investigators intrigued and wondering what really happened here.
It's a good case, and it has a lot going for it.
All these years later, it's still a mystery about San Diego.
I was carrying the 2 cats. I was walking to the garage, and I got by this corner right by the house here, and I looked, and there was this weird object, funny noises, and it was really bright, and I didn't know what I should do. So I was going back and forth, and finally I threw the cat in the garage, and then I ran to the house around the corner, and I couldn't get the door open.
When I first saw it, I was standing approximately right here, but I couldn't get too good of a view of it because the brush and the trees are in the way. So then I went back into the house, and I got my coat on. My 2 youngest boys and Jane were following me. We went over here to get a better look at the object that was sitting on the road, and my curiosity still wanted me to get a better view of it, so we walked down. Of course, the ground was covered with snow, and my car was sitting here in the driveway, and of course there were snowbanks on the side of the roads, and there's where I got my estimate of the size of the object, approximately 12 feet in diameter, with the markings in the snow, and I would judge the object at the center of it was approximately 6 feet high. It was like a turtle. My 2 boys and my girl started to proceed here closer. My girl told me not to go any closer to it. She ran back in the house.
He was going to go walking up to it, and I went back to the house and told my mom that he was going to go up there and get closer to it. And she came out and she yelled at him.
My wife came out and hollered at me and told me not to be foolish and go any closer to it, not knowing exactly what the object was on the road. And of course I did get a very good view of it from here, as there was nothing blocking my vision on the road.
And we went in the house and we called the deputy sheriff. And when the deputy said hello, it was a boom and it was gone. I went out and I couldn't see it anymore.
Well, Monty, my oldest boy, he was all upset. He told my other 2 boys, now don't say anything. Don't say anything to kids at school. We don't want nothing of this to get out. And of course, Janie was in tears. She says, well, I know what I saw. She says, you trying to tell me I'm crazy or something? She says, I know what we saw. She says, don't try to tell me I didn't see anything, because she said, I know I saw it. And she was in tears and everything else that night. And of course, the undersheriff, I apologized when he left me off here, because I thought, well, now we didn't find anything. He'll think I'm a little off too. And he said, no, don't forget, just forget about it. I said, well, okay, let's forget about it. And I said, but don't tell anybody then. Matter of fact, I even mentioned him. I said, don't tell anybody. I said, just forget it then, because I said let's drop the whole story.
I've known Mr. Baker for about 30 years, and he and his family have been here a long time. And when this story broke on the UFOs, he asked me not to put it in the paper because of the anxiety his family was being put through by callers and curiosity seekers. And so I thought that I wouldn't. And he was very appreciative. I honored his wish to not have it printed.
On the night of November 2nd, 1975, I was sitting here doing my homework, and I looked out the window, and right above the blue building, I saw a UFO come down out of the sky. And it landed behind the building, and behind the building is a football field. It landed there. A lot of people in town saw it. I don't know how many people saw it and told us the next day that they saw this thing up in the sky. In the sky.
As we pulled around the driveway here, I noticed up by the blue shed over there that there was something in the sky. So I pulled out of the driveway. I said, turn down here, we can maybe get closer to it. So we just went over this way. And then you could just see it real good before the trees. It was definitely right there. And we just drove up here, and by that stop sign near the railroad tracks, there was a fence across, so we couldn't go any further. And we just noticed it. It was just coming right in front of the trees, and we just stood here a minute till we saw it just glide over the top of the trees, and then it was gone.
Well, a couple days later, after we saw the UFO go down, I saw a lot of people over here looking at something, so I came over here and I found this big brown spot on the football field where the grass had been burnt. As you can see, the blue building is right over there, and the burned spot is right here, and it's right in line with the window we saw the UFO come down from.
Yeah, at the time, it wasn't scary. It didn't frighten me when I looked out the window and I saw it. I didn't get scared or anything. But afterwards, when I realized that what I had seen was unexplainable, that's when it started to get scary. And then when they found the patch on the football field, well, that got a little worse.
It's been 6 months since we saw the UFO go down. And as you can see, the burnt spot is still visible. I just wish I knew what it was. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I mean, if it was something, from another country or something the Army was putting up in the air, I wish they'd come and tell us that this was it, and not just leave us out here thinking that it was something from some outer space place.
I'd be satisfied with any kind of a explanation. If I had never seen a UFO, I wouldn't believe in it. I wouldn't believe me if I were you. Because I have nothing to show you. I can't say, I saw this. I just have nothing. All you have is my word. It's been 6 months since we saw the UFO go down. And as you can see, the burnt spot is still visible.
This happens to be the sample from the Medford site, number 2, which does show some strange luminescence properties. And so I'd want to make sure that the sample that I'm dealing with is not in itself radioactive. And I don't find that it is. I don't see any evidence of increased radioactivity. Furnace ready to be inserted here into the light chamber. And now we've inserted the sample, which is on the electric furnace, into the chamber, and we're going to start heating it. Well, we're going to start off here by looking then at the glow curves, which I ran about 2 months ago on the Medford site. And if we look at the curve at the center of the site, we see that there's just a very small rise here. That is, the luminescence peak is very small. At the edge of the site, as we proceed along here, at the edge of the site, we discover the intense luminescence. Now, this luminescence that we are observing is apparently the result of some sort of radiation effect. It looks, at least, as though that particular sample at the edge of the site has been subjected to some kind of high-energy radiation.
My friend Philip here was trying to find a way over the stream, and I was looking at the bushes up the top of the trees. And then suddenly this silver cigar-shaped object seemed to pop up from behind the bushes and trying to take off. Then it disappeared again.
Well, I saw the spaceship. I didn't see the man. The spaceship, it looked a cigar shape with a dome on it. And it had a yellowy, orange to red light on the top of it.
And how clearly did you see it?
Well, I couldn't see its face because it was too far away.
You say you saw a man as well, did you?
Yes.
And what about him?
Well, he was too far away to be seen as well.
Are you sure it wasn't perhaps just a helicopter or an aircraft from the airfield near here?
A helicopter could land there, but that's private property over there. And if they landed there, they could be prosecuted. And with an aircraft, the only thing that could get in there was a Harrier.
Were you frightened at the time?
Yes.
Why?
Well, I thought there would be a whole army inside there or something.
I know that 16 children saw it.
And did they all see the same thing, do you think?
There's a common core of similarity between all their descriptions. I got them to draw and to write what they saw.
Hudson County, New Jersey, the town of North Bergen,
a middle-class suburb across the river from New York City. Its residents are hard-working, educated professionals who tend to be realists. This is also a place where there have been persistent claims of alien and UFO sightings. George Obarski owned a Manhattan liquor store and drove the same route back to his home in North Bergen, New Jersey, every night for decades. At 3 a.m. on the morning of January 12, 1975, as he was driving through the local park, his radio reception suddenly became distorted. He related the subsequent events to UFO investigator Bud Hopkins, who recorded his story with a portable tape recorder.
Well, I would say that thing was 30 feet across. It was a big thing.
Yeah.
And it seemed to be, I would say, maybe 6 feet high. You know, like a pancake. It was blown up like a pancake.
Right.
And the thing landed right ahead of me.
He described small figures who got out. He said they looked like kids in snowsuits. And they were each one carrying a kind of a squarish receptacle and a long spoon-like shovel. They dug soil samples extremely quickly, spooning up the dirt, put it in the little satchels, and got back in the craft. He said they moved incredibly fast, like kids coming down a fire escape. And the thing took off. He was absolutely terrified, stunned. He didn't know what he was seeing.
Even after George Obarski made it home, he was still shaken, terrorized by what he had encountered.
I was scared to death.
Yeah.
You know, I was sweating, and I immediately made some tea. And boy, after that, I turned on this radio and took 2 aspirins. You know, I was scared.
Right.
But man, just either I'm gone crazy or something awful wrong there.
George Obarski died in 1990. His son, Frank, remembers his father's story well.
What he described was a big saucer-like object, which, for want of any better explanation, you'd have to call a UFO, unidentified flying object, that came down, was sort of disc-like on the bottom, had very strange lighting, sort of glowed. The clincher was, after it landed, my father described himself as being basically frozen, almost in fear. And this is a guy who'd been robbed a lot in the liquor store in New York and knew what fear was like and had coped with it a lot. But he said he was genuinely frightened of this thing.
Bud Hopkins tried to corroborate George Obarski's story with other witnesses, including a doorman who worked at the Stonehenge apartment building across the street from the park.
I realized it was a big apartment building there. So I spent weeks trying to locate the doorman. I called him, and I remember my adrenaline rushing when this man said, "I will never forget it. This flying saucer came down and landed in the park." And I watched the thing come down. Then he started describing what it looked like, and it was an identical description to George.
After writing about Obarski's story in the Village Voice newspaper, Bud Hopkins kept looking for other possible witnesses.
One family came to light afterwards. They were living about 5 blocks away, seeing this object coming down the street, maybe 40 feet up, slanted. And they described it as if it was looking in their windows. And even though the woman in the family was ill, she ran outside in her nightgown, bare feet, and the father and the children ran out, and they followed this thing down the street.
A North Bergen schoolteacher, Ann Karlovich, says she listened skeptically as her daughters described the telltale evidence in the park on the day after the alleged incident.
Back in 1975, we had heard about this incident that there was a flying saucer in the park. So my daughter and her friends went down to the park to see what was going on, and they all came running back saying they saw rings and burn marks in the grass in the field down near the softball field. And they told me the whole story about broken windows, that the Stonehenge had a large glass facade and it was broken by a beam of light that hit it. The kids were awfully excited about it.
Frank Obarski also went to the site with his father. He knew him as a practical man, so it was difficult for him to understand why his dad held to such a seemingly irrational story.
He didn't show much interest in things that couldn't be proved or disproved or that didn't apply to everyday life. And this was one of those categories that he felt didn't apply to everyday life. So I had a lot of trouble reconciling my knowledge of my father with this story he was telling me.
He said, I've lived a long life as honorably and truthfully as I was able to. And he said, a man doesn't do that for over 70 years and then throw it all away by making up some foolishness.
Well, I've taken a good deal of interest in the Bentwaters incident because it was so widely publicized. Books have been written about it. I've listened to tapes made by cable news and people like that. And I've had a certain amount of dealings with ministers over this particular incident, the only one I have. And I think, in a nutshell, one of two things happened. Either something entered our airspace, landed at Bentwaters, or United States Air Force officers and senior non-commissioned officers were hallucinating. And in either explanation, there must be a defense interest in it, contrary to what the government has repeatedly said.
Which of those two alternatives do you prefer?
I myself think it's very difficult indeed to discount the almost certainty that something landed there.
Something from where?
I've no idea. I wish I had. I don't doubt at all that governments all over the world, with the possible exception of the French, have kept information available to them about these matters secret, because much of it is now flowing out in the United States under their Freedom of Information Act, which wouldn't have been released otherwise.
Incredibly, in 1990, one of these UFOs reportedly attacked a radar antenna near the Soviet city of Samara. It was one of the most shocking UFO military confrontations on record.
A triangular-shaped object flew near a military base in Samara and then landed right next to a mobile air defense radar unit. Apparently, the radar units turned to pick up, this UFO. The UFO shot a beam at the radar and basically destroy completely that radar unit.
The Samara incident was witnessed by a Soviet officer named Rudzit. In this newly released Russian documentary, Rudzit's face is hidden because at the time of the interview, he feared he'd be court-martialed for speaking publicly.
I saw with my own eyes the antenna destroyed by an explosion. It was due to a very strong blow from without. I saw burnt paint and melted metal parts of the antenna, and also reduction gears scattered all around.
Professor Semyakov is a biologist.
Но обычно мы стараемся, чтобы были свидетели. Значит, лучше, если бывает несколько свидетелей, которые фиксируют это место. А затем мы проводим параллельные исследования, то есть делаем биолокацию, и либо радиометрическими методами определяем место посадки НЛО. Там характерно было то, что была вдавлена почва, как бы огромный каток был поставлен на почву диаметром 4 метра. Почва была вдавлена на 5 сантиметров. Это пока говорит о очень большом весе НЛО. И НЛО представляло собой, как по рассказам очевидцам, колбу. Эта колба была как бы на ножке, стояла на поляне и возвышалась даже над лесом на 5 метров. И что для этого пришлось сделать небольшой аппарат. Он заключался в том, что мы взяли камеру, в этой камере была мембрана, и в эту камеру помещались мухи. Но мухи какие? Дрозофилы, бескрылые линии. Мухи могли только бегать по этой мембране, но не могли летать. Далее шел усилитель, и все это прослушивалось наушниками. Получалось так. Достаточно было, вот в частности, эти исследования проведены также в Шарапе-Охоте, было достаточно войти в зону посадки НЛО, как мухи возбуждались. Достаточно было выйти из зоны посадки, мухи опять затихали. Обычно в темноте, в камере, в которой они находятся, они ведут себя тихо и не двигаются. Таким образом, мы можем создать и биоиндикатор, который работает на основе использования насекомых, которые очень чувствительны к различным полям и изменению полей.
In September of 1989, something happened in the city of Voronezh, 200 miles south of Moscow, which caught the attention of the world press. For several weeks, strange lights were seen over the city. Then on September the 27th, it was reported that a spacecraft landed in one of the city's public parks. from which 3 alien giant figures emerged. Drawings of the landings by children who were there capture the event vividly. Sergei Makarov was one of the school children who was in the Voronezh park.
I remember a crowd that gathered around the place. Everybody was scared. Everybody turned pale. I was absolutely flabbergasted.
Denis Mozhenko was also one of the boys in the park on that day in September 1989.
I saw some traces there, and also a strange man. Outwardly, he looked like any other man, only he was huge. A moment later, he suddenly disappeared.
I had no doubt that the UFO and the giants existed, because I saw them. But sometimes when I look back, it seems sort of like a fairy tale.
The creatures started coming out. They did not look too much like humans. They were much taller than humans. They did have shoulders, but I didn't see the head.
We walked. We look and see this ball, such a brilliant iridescent flute. We ran to that gate, reached and stopped. It hung there.
Where is the object headed?
Here, it flew, then hung at the level of a poplar tree.
What is poplar?
This one, nearby.
Right at the level of the top of the poplar tree hung?
No,
Where?
in the middle part of it.
Show it not as you are told, but as you saw it yourself.
Here, well, somewhere over there. Could you see? See this lamp on the pole, approximately at this level.
And so here, near the poplar.
Yes, and right here, where Yura Sergachev right there. Stood, sat down there, landed, and the light changed. Stood for 10 minutes, or maybe 5 minutes. Something we were afraid, and he rose a little, and meter and a half, and disappeared. Still, I look like the outline of a person. Its appearance, you know, like a pencil drawing. It's just a sapling. Only his head was big.
What were your ears like? It was like your ears. Did you notice?
There were no ears at all, and no hair, bald just.
What about eyes? Maybe your nose?
The eyes were there, and there is the nose. You know, that's how it diverges.
Tanya wasn't the only person who saw the craft on the ground. Before they headed over to the Grange, Victor Zakruzny says 2 objects landed in a grassy paddock where a street is now.
Well, the kids were hanging on the fence there. There's quite a few kids there. It's a high fence, and I got up to the top there, and all you could see is 2 discs, one there and one a bit further away, probably 3 metres apart. I could hear somebody in the background saying, "Stay away, don't jump the fence," and so I said, "Oh, bugger, I'm going over the fence." The craft probably would have been about there, and there was another one set back a bit on an angle, probably just about there. There's a few kids walking around there, and I was the only one on this side. I got up to it to want to touch it, and it was, well, you could feel heat about a metre away coming from it. It was pretty warm or hot, and within a minute or so, it just, both of them just lifted up at the same time, about this height. And I seen, oh, that was breathtaking watching that, and then it just gradually lifted up and then went off towards the pines. I did a rough sketch of it.
Wow, look at that. This is the view from underneath.
That's underneath. There's no seams, no joints, it's just smooth metal. Normally an aircraft has sheet metal, pipe rivets, or all that sort of stuff there. This looked like come out of a mould or something like that, all one smooth piece of metal. It was just incredible. It's just something like you see in the movies.
I think one of the most important events in UFO history, which occurred on September 16th, 1994, last year. What occurred was after 2 days of sightings of objects in the sky and flashing lights recorded by the BBC reporter there, station chief in Harare, the capital of Zimbabwe. At 10 o'clock on the morning, Friday morning, at this school where these children were, 20 minutes outside of Harare, the older children who were monitoring the younger children noticed that the younger children were wandering outside the school perimeter. They were going further out of the schoolyard than they should have gone. So the older children followed the younger children to bring them back, and the younger children pointed to in the field and said to the older children, "Look," and the older children saw this large UFO hovering above the ground and several smaller craft there and 2 or more alien beings there, and the children became very excited, all of them. 60 or more children saw this, the ones that were out there. As happens so often, and Jacques and others may comment on this, there's always this irony of data. The adults were in a meeting, the children came rushing in excitedly, frightened about what this mysterious thing that they had seen. They told the adults excitedly, no adult went out to see this. And by the time the break was over and it was time to go out, there was nothing there to be seen. And this trickster-like play of information just runs constantly through this field. Maybe Peter Storer could comment on if you have some familiarity with that elusiveness of data that, because these kids, at first they didn't believe them, and many of the parents didn't believe the kids, but as the consistency of the stories came up over and over and over again, this very hard-nosed headmaster came to the conclusion those children saw something that was not of this world. That was his phrase. And even the teachers, who were even more skeptical, we met with all the teachers in a room, and we went around the room to hear what they thought, and they said, I know those kids, this happened, they saw it. The teachers were shocked and appalled, but it was kind of like a single event just shattering their worldview, because they were geared not to believe this, and yet there was just no other explanation.
Here is Liesel Pillai. She's a real darling, very bright, 13-year-old young girl, and she is drawing it so precisely. She says, I can't draw the feet of the being because the feet I couldn't see, they're on the grass. This gives you an idea that they're not confabulating. Of course, you could draw the feet, but no. She said, I can't draw the feet. I couldn't see them because the grass was covering the feet. Which is logical.
I don't see his feet. I don't see this part here.
She's not drawing it.
I don't see his fingers. During break time, we were playing in the field, and then we just saw some flickering of lights near the dam, and then we just saw the silver thing. We just saw the silver thing that had just stood there, and we saw 2 people. One had long hair, the other one was bald, and they both had big eyes. And then all the little grade ones were all scared. They were all crying. So then the prefects and I went to the teacher to go and tell them about this. But they didn't believe us.
"50-year-old Polish immigrant and amateur geologist Stephen Mahalik looked forward to his weekend getaways alone in the Falcon Lake area, 90 miles east of his home in Winnipeg, Manitoba. This was Mahalik's favorite prospecting site. Around noon on May 20th, 1967, as he examined a quartz formation, Mahalik was distracted by some unruly geese. He looked up and was transfixed. He says he saw 2 cigar-shaped objects glowing red in the sky. The following is a recording Mahalik later made of what he saw next.
The size, was amazing. And here they're coming down. With speed, I just can't describe. Amazing speed.
Mahalik says one of them stopped, suddenly accelerated, then disappeared. The other landed about 50 yards away. He watched in awe.
I hear shh, and I hear a high-pitched whistle of running equipment, pumps on high speed. When the thing landed, it was of gray-pink color. It's stainless steel, and it was pink hot. And I can feel the breeze on my face that thing is hot outside. There was my notebook, there was my pencil, so I sketched this thing.
Mahalik claims it was round, about 40 feet long and about 10 feet high. His curiosity took hold and he approached the craft. He examined the outside of it, slowly touching the glowing skin with his gloved hand. It was fiery hot, nearly melting the palm of his rubber glove. Mahalik says the craft rotated, turning its grid-like exhaust vent toward him. The blast of hot gas from the vent knocked him to the ground, setting his shirt and undershirt on fire. The craft suddenly lifted off the ground, according to Mahalik, and soared straight up. He threw his burning shirts to the ground, dazed and in severe pain from burns to his chest and stomach. Mahalik says he wandered around for what seemed like hours before he managed to gather up his supplies. He found his way out of the woods, caught a bus, and later that night arrived back in Winnipeg. Still in pain, he rushed from the bus station to nearby Misericordia Hospital, where he was treated for first-degree burns. Mahalik claimed the blast from the craft had etched a grid-like pattern into his abdomen that matched the pattern on the exhaust vent. The next day, Sunday, he was spirited off to the St. Regis Hotel after convincing the managing editor of Winnipeg's highly regarded daily newspaper, the Winnipeg Tribune, that his extraordinary encounter was real.
At that time, I said, okay, as any newsman would have done, draw it. I gave him a piece of paper. I think that drawing has become the most famous UFO piece of evidence in the world today. He sat down, he drew it in front of me. I hid it. I talked to him. I called doctors, I called police, and I sure as hell didn't want the Winnipeg Free Press getting the story.
Monday's edition of the Tribune led with this headline: Mahalik soon became a sensation worldwide. What followed was one of the most intensely examined UFO cases on record. Over the next 2 years, Mahalik's burns kept recurring, and no one could explain why. He was examined by more than a dozen physicians in Canada and the United States, including doctors at the Mayo Clinic. An investigation by the Royal Canadian Air Force concluded that the abdominal burns sustained by Mr. Mahalik remain as unexplainable as to the source of the burn. The Mayo Clinic psychological report concluded that Mahalik was not prone to delusions, hallucinations, or any type of emotional disorder. University of Manitoba astronomer Chris Rutkowski, believing the government reports left many questions unanswered, launched his own investigation. In 1994, he published The Falcon Lake Case, Too Close an Encounter, in the respected Journal of UFO Studies.
The terrain around the site is very rugged, very rocky. The brush is very, very dense. The trees all look alike. The rocks all look alike. And to a person who's disoriented, not feeling very well, it might be very, very difficult to find the exact site after some period of time has elapsed.
Skeptics, disagreeing with Rutkowski, also do not believe that Mahalik would make physical contact with an extremely hot object he assumed was a UFO. But this does not surprise his son.
He is the kind of fellow that fear is not in his vocabulary. Not that he's a fearless man, but that when he sees something he doesn't understand, he doesn't fear it. He just chooses to understand it. For my dad to fabricate something as large as this would require more than I think he had, more than he has. He's a simple man. He grew up and lived a very straight, hard life.
This was no con man. This was a man who later went down to Mayo. They couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure it out. The doctor I had there couldn't figure it out. I am not about to be taken by anybody. This guy didn't take me. This guy was legit.
It was a day like today in 1983 when we seen this object. Well, it wasn't an object, it was a shining back there. We didn't know what it was. And I couldn't really get a clear picture of it. I went in the house and got my binoculars and looked out across the field and make out what was out there, and I couldn't really see very good because of the way the the terrain is here.
But with your naked eye, you'd seen some stuff go in it.
Yeah, I did, glittering.
And what about you?
Well, that's what he told me. He said, there's something out there. I keep seeing something flickering. It's out of the ordinary. You just don't see something, you know, shining and flickering across.
And so it's right out here.
It was right across there.
Now, when you got here and you put the binoculars up, what exactly could you see?
Well, when I put the binoculars up and looked in there, there was a green cone-shaped craft back there. It was green and looked solid. And it had there was a door on it with a platform coming out onto the side of the hill. And the lizard-type creature, he was standing next to the cone-shaped ship. I told Paula, I said, look, Paula, there's something back there. Look at this. Look at this. And she took the binoculars and looked through them.
I took them and I looked. Just like that. And I couldn't see I didn't see the craft, but I could see the creature.
Now,
and then I got to...
Which creature?
It had big green eyes. And it looked like leaves on it, or like it was camouflaged. And I'm looking at it, and then it looked at me with its big eyes, and my heart just stopped beating, and I couldn't breathe. And I just said, it's staring right back at me. And so then I handed them back to Ron. I said, I saw the thing, and it's looking right back at me. And so then he started looking some more, and I was really getting scared.
Now, where is it? Which one saw the cow and these two little griffins?
That's where we looked again. I was back there trying to find out where that ship and everything was, back and forth, and I could see it. And I passed the binoculars back to Paula again because we were fighting back and forth with binoculars. Man, we
wanted to see, because I keep thinking, has it moved? You know.
And that's when she looked and seen that little.
I looked at, because see, then I'm looking over there and I'm thinking, all right, if he's right there, then what was shining? And I saw this big black cow laying down with its mouth, and I said, my God, they got a cow. But what are they doing to it? And it was just laying there. And it had its eyes open, and its tongue was like hanging out a little bit, not real bad, but it just laid there and didn't move. And they just were running their fingers over it like that, and running them down it and looking at their fingers.
Now these are two little silver beings, and their heads, it didn't look like there was no helmet on. So, because I thought, I wonder if they can breathe our air, so you would think like an astronaut helmet or something. But I didn't see nothing like that. But they had these little packs on their back. Okay, now show me again. Let's say that the cow...
And the cow was laying down.
Here, and it's completely still.
Uh-huh. And its head is like right where your foot would be, and its mouth's open. And then there was one being on one side and one on the other. And they just reached over to it and were like fingering through its hair on its neck. Because, like, see, there's its neck and the head. And they were just doing like that. And then looking at their fingers. Then the next thing is they had their hands over it, and there was a black ramp. And they just went like this. And the cow just went up, and it just floated right up the ramp into a hill. And once it got into the hill, like where the trees are, see?
You mean like a conveyor belt or something?
Yeah.
Did they just like float? Did the cow float?
The cow just floated right up. I mean, there was nobody hauled it. I mean, it just moved right onto that ramp and just went right up and disappeared right into the hill, into where the trees are and everything. And it looked like there was actually a hill that it went up into.
Which was the ship. And Paula got me real nervous.
I got scared.
She got real scared because she said, hey, if they're doing that to animals, what can they, what's next? Here we are a family. They can come over here and do as they well please if they're doing,
Out in the boondocks. We told everyone, said, oh man, we saw these aliens out there with this cow. They said, oh, sure you did. Nobody could find nothing.
Like we were crazy.
So later on I said, oh, how's everything going with your cows over there? And he said, yeah, we're missing a cow. I said, oh, really? Is it a black cow? They said, yeah.